just realized I didn't post this.
Internal Slack. Anybody wants to watch it on that thing. By the way, once this is over, we on the developer portal, developer.wau.edu, on the page where you learn how to migrate, we'll post a link to this actual training here, so you'll be able to represent that.
Okay, so let's get started with this. And like I was saying, if you have questions during, interject. Don't wait until I've spewed an hour's worth of information at you and then forget your question. So we can totally do this interactive. Today we're going to be specifically talking about consumption of APIs in the new API manager. I know that there's probably a lot of you who don't understand the terms WSO2 and SOASoft. Don't worry about it. SOASoft is the old way of dealing with APIs. In probably 90% of the APIs you were calling, you just didn't even know it was there. But we're putting a new product that we call WSO2. We won't call it that for all of our communications. We'll just, once the two are gone, we'll refer to it as our API management solution. So if you get confused, if I say something weird, I'm sorry. I deal with it every day. And so feel free to ask me what I'm trying to say. So for the old API management solution, we're currently targeting a date of April 30th to retire all calls that are traveling through that infrastructure. SOASoft is an extremely old piece of software. We're to the point where we can't patch, can't update, can't do anything about it, or it's going to go down. We're years out of our support contract. And there's basically one person on campus that can actually fully support it. And if he gets hit by a bus or has any kind of medical issue, we're just all dead in the water. So we're trying to quickly get off of that. We've got a lot of problems with it. It's already trying to send itself off of a cliff and is going out every so often without us doing anything. So we definitely need to get off it. That's why we're moving to this new system. There's a lot of other benefits we're going to go through that we get from the new system that we've never had before, that are going to improve both your lives as consumers and the lives of the developers who are trying to produce the APIs you're consuming. So specifically, let's get into what actually is going away in this. The actual physical servers that run the SOASoft infrastructure are going away. So any of the calls that you're making today that travel through those boxes will stop. You can safely assume that that's all of your API calls. There are a few exceptions to that case, but almost all of the API calls are going through those boxes. Along with that, API key nonce authentication, if that's the current authentication mechanism you're using, where you have an API key, you ask for a nonce, you do an HMAC encryption, and send the request back. That authentication mechanism is going away, as is basic auth. And then one of the other big things is that the URLs are changing. We're still going to stick with the base for all APIs going forward will be api.byu.edu. Right now, you kind of have a mix of api.byu, ws.byu, and soaregistry.byu.edu. That WS and SOA registry will go away, and it'll all be focused in api.byu.edu. But even if you have a URL today that is api.byu, that URL has changed. We're remapping things. So let's go over some specifics about what actually is changing, why, what's different, what you have to be concerned about as we go forward. Again, SOASoft used basic auth and API nonce encryption or authentication. And there were a lot of SOAP services as well as some REST services. There's quite a bit of heft towards the SOAP side of things in our old infrastructure. For our new infrastructure, we are using OAuth 2 as the only authentication mechanism. That's the only way you can authenticate against the API manager. Most all services are now REST. We'll get into a little bit later some of the changes that have happened in APIs. Almost all of the APIs that have been moved haven't been changed. The data will still come back the same way. You're not going to have to worry about changing underlying logic in your applications. You can expect the data to look identically as it has in the past. There are a few exceptions to that. We have some HR services that were originally SOAP that the team has decided to migrate to REST during this transition. So there are a couple of things that were SOAP that have now become REST. And really, of the new APIs in the new API manager, you can pretty safely assume you won't ever see SOAP anymore. We've gotten almost completely rid of SOAP. One of the new features that's really nice for the developers, and for the developers, the backend service is going to serve the clients as well, is that we track subscriptions to APIs now. If you want to utilize an API, you have to subscribe to it. It's a really easy process. We're going to walk through it. But it allows the backend developers to know who you are. Today, we have zero idea of who is calling what APIs. For example, the control dates API is one of the most highly used APIs across campus, but I couldn't tell you a single person who uses it, which causes a whole ton of issues for when the developers need to change things. They have no idea who you are. You end up getting left out in the cold because they didn't know that you were using it. They changed it on top of you. And the subscriptions model helps that and fixes that issue. The developers know who you are. They know how to contact you. If you have a developer change an API out from under you, feel free to get mad at them and tell them Braden said you could, because they know who you are. That's not an excuse anymore. And so you don't have to be concerned about just getting lost in all of the people.
Plus it helps with denial of service attacks, because if somebody's trying to get your API, you know who's calling you.
Exactly. Yes.
The subscription thing where the person may change their job in the future?
No, we're actually hooking it to the application, the client, the credentials that are actually consuming the API. For right now, a person sets that up. So you would log in, set up those application credentials, and subscribe. If you leave the university later on, feel free to contact me and we'll transition who owns that application around. We're hoping to get to a better solution in the future, but right now applications are tied to a person that administers them. And so we can move that around for you. You know, all of us as administrators can happily do that for you, but that's just kind of one of those roadblocks we have. You can use an on-person person to log in if you want.
Contact person changes in that case. So you're trying to.
That is a known issue with it, but you know, we'll mitigate that by just let us know.
Yeah, that is something that we are in discussions about. Yeah, we'll go through that. Alongside of that, we have a new UI. It's referenced as the API store. In the past, there was no good way for you to find what APIs were currently available to you through any part of OIT or BYU. You just kind of got hearsay and said, I want an API that does this, and someone handed you a URL and said, happy birthday. But now we have a store, we have a place where you can go look through all the APIs we offer, see what they're producing, what they ask for, and find an API that actually is going to fit your use case. Which also means that you can find an API that fits your use case best. You know, I mean, we have probably 300 APIs that'll return a net ID to you if you ask for it. And you can find the one that actually fits what you're looking for instead of getting way more information that you didn't need. And we also have what's called the developer portal. The developer portal is the place where we're putting all of the API documentation. Documentation is going there, just generalized documentation on how to use APIs in general or consume events. All that kind of documentation is going to go into the developer portal. We've put forth a ton of effort, months and months of work, to make sure that that is all updated automatically to help ease the problem we have today of, if you are lucky enough to find API documentation for an API, it's probably 10 years old. And it's probably been changed 100 times since then. So we're trying to mitigate that problem the best we can. We've made it really easy on the backend developers to update. They just update. We use, if you're familiar with the Swagger or the Open API standard, it's what we're using to document on the backend. And so the developers update that in their own code repositories, and we're automatically propagating those changes out for the documentation for you to see, so it stays up to date. Questions thus far? Okay, I know it's like a fire hose. We're gonna get through it. We're gonna go over OAuth 2 a little bit. If any of you are familiar with OAuth 2, it'll kind of be a rehash of things you already know. But for those of you who've never used it before, we'll hopefully get into enough detail that you can have a starting place. So OAuth 2 specifically, the OAuth 2 standard has a lot of what they call flows. There's a lot of different ways you can handle authentication with OAuth 2. We specifically support 4 of those flows, which are client credentials, authorization code, implicit, and resource owner credentials. We'll go over what each of those means, what you would use them for, or where you would use them, so you can pick the best fit for your application. So client credentials is specifically used for service-to-service communication. If you have a batch process, if you have a web service that calls another web service, anything that doesn't involve a user actually sitting at a keyboard, client credentials is the flow type you will use. It just authenticates against the application, uses the application's credentials to call another application, and there's what in OAuth terms is referred to as the resource owner. The resource owner in OAuth terms is the actual user using the application, or the user sitting at the keyboard. That can be kind of a little bit of a confusing term at times. I'm sorry. I know it doesn't fit our BYU terms exactly the way we'd love it to, but that is the OAuth 2 standard term, is resource owner. Client credentials makes it super easy for you to get the token that you need to authenticate. It's essentially just one API call. You get back an OAuth token that's valid for an hour, and you continue to run with that. One of the big benefits of going to OAuth over our API key nonce authentication is, first of all, OAuth 2 is standard. You can utilize all of the OAuth 2 libraries out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, and especially with our API nonce key authentication, you don't have to find someone who actually knows how the whole thing works. I mean, the current API nonce key authentication isn't really documented anywhere, and the places it is, it's not documented great. It takes a lot of time and effort to understand. But OAuth 2 is completely standard. We're up to spec. And so that makes it way easier on you as a developer to understand how that all works. It also, with the API key nonce authentication, you had to make a call for a nonce every time you wanted to make an API call. So you call for the nonce, get it back, format everything, make the call. The next call, you had to go ask for a new one. With OAuth 2, you'll get back a token that is by default valid for an hour, which means that you only make a call once per hour, and you're free to run and use that token over and over again in that hour, which will severely cut down on network traffic. It'll cut down on the amount of time it takes you to get an API call through. It helps a lot of that speed up quite a bit. So now, client credentials is the only flow type that we utilize without a user. These next 3 all involve a resource owner, someone who actually is physically using the application. Authorization code is the most common of those 3 flows. So it's utilized when you have a resource owner, and because of that, it involves redirects. So client credentials involves just a straight API call. You're making it from a server. There is no web browser. It's headless, so it just makes an API call. With authorization code, because of the web browser, because of the way we authenticate the user, it handles redirects. So the users will actually get redirected into CAS. They'll see a CAS screen. They'll log in, and everything will come back after it's authorized you. So you won't have to worry about grabbing their credentials. You don't have to worry about seeing any of that, or maintaining security around any of that. We'll handle all of that authentication piece for you and hand you back what's called an authorization code. Once you have that authorization code, it's used alongside your client credentials to call back and get the valid OAuth token and a refresh token. And this is where this gets important, because this is how the next 2 change from this. What a refresh token is used for, the access token typically, like I said, has a default expiry time of an hour. So when that hour's up, you no longer can make calls for the user. The refresh token allows you to get a new valid token for the user without the user having to re-authenticate, which means especially if you have a system that acts on behalf of the user when they're not sitting at the keyboard or does anything behind the scenes for them, or you need a long-term access for that user, this is how you do it. So that refresh token can be used forever until the user revokes your application's rights to their information, and can be used over and over again to just continue to get new access tokens for that user. You don't need to re-authenticate the user every hour. Because of the way the refresh token works, the refresh token has to be treated as a secret. It gives you access to basically continue to get tokens out for the user. Because of that, authorization code is designed to be used in cases where you can keep things secret. It involves both the client secret for your application and the refresh token. So you need some kind of secure something, whether that be a secure backend, whatever that may be, it has to be something secure. one of the main use cases that this doesn't work for is something like a single page application. When it's all just static JavaScript and HTML, there's nowhere for you to hide a secret in JavaScript. It's all accessible. And so in those cases, we'll get to the flow that works for. But this is specifically designed to be used in any case where you can have that secret or care to have that. You don't have to use this if you do. Implicit grant type is the other flow that you would use in a single page application mindset. If you've got a static page, static JavaScript, or just any other type of implementation where you really just either don't care to have the refresh token or don't want to have to worry about keeping it secure. Implicit works exactly the same as authorization code, except for you don't get a refresh token and you don't get an authorization code. What happens is after the redirect comes back to you, part of the redirect coming back just includes the token. You're able to grab that in JavaScript on the front end. It's part of the URL fragment, so it's not accessible to any backend services along the way. And JavaScript can grab that. Now, the caveat to this being, because you only get an access token, once that hour has passed, once expiry time for that token has passed, the only way to get a new one is to redirect the user once again. Now, if their cast session is still valid, they won't ever see a new login screen. And the redirect is actually extremely fast. It takes about 20, 30 milliseconds to run through it. The users typically don't even see the flash. But your client-side application has to have logic for things like they just filled out this huge form for an application. They did a 3,000-word essay, and they went to click submit, and the token's dead. And so you need the logic to be able to cache that form, go redirect, grab a new token, and come back and then reload the cache. It's definitely doable. It works really well. But that's just something to keep in mind, is that you have to always be prepared for caching what information has been entered so that you can dance through the redirects again. Micah, did you have a question?
There's a question of how to handle proper when you're in the middle of something.
Oh, so did I answer your question?
Yeah. Perfect.
And so, yeah, once again, this is meant for any kind of front-end application that doesn't have a way to store secrets. It's just really simple, really straightforward. It also doesn't involve your client's secret at all. It's designed in a way that the only things that have to be in code are public knowledge. And so that it handles that in a secure fashion. Finally, the third flow is resource owner credentials. This flow is definitely mainly focused for a testing type service. It's not preferred to be run in production. The reason being is that it's utilized in applications that capture username and password, which we don't want you to have to take on the lovely implications of capturing users' passwords. So, but there are use cases. If you have a desktop application that can't handle a web browser for these other redirect flows, or you have any other kind of application where for some reason you've captured the user's credentials, they can be used in this flow. Because the user never has to see cast, this flow is done programmatically. You essentially send a request to the backend with the user's username and password, and you're handed back a token for it. Again, not the best production use case, but it's fantastic for testing. If you need to test your application, you want to test that makes sure that the user flows are working without going through all the redirects for some reason, like an automated test. This can do and looks exactly the same way to the backends that those other two user flows do without you having to have a web browser involved. It totally abstracts that need for a web browser. And just like authorization code, you will get a refresh token and an access token back. So once you pass on those credentials, you don't need to keep the credentials after that, because you'll be handed a refresh token that you can continue to use from then on. Are there any questions so far about the different flows? I know it's a ton of information. Okay, and we'll go over, don't let me forget to show you where all of this that we're going over is documented in the developer portal. So when you need to go back and reference it, it's all there.
Useful to just quick grant type do you want to use in a particular scenario?
Well, okay, so for this last one, is this what you would use? Let's say you're just trying to grab something quick at a shell. Obviously, you're not going to bounce off cast. This is how you do that then?
If you needed to authenticate a user, right? Because if you don't need to authenticate a user, you can just use client credentials. This is only in a case where this kind of gets into the way the backends work, which you don't need to concern yourself with for consumption, but the backends will receive information for both the client, which is the application that's actually running, And then if there is a user, they'll also receive the user's information. 99% of the APIs we run don't care if the user's there or not. If the user's not there, it uses whatever authorization has been granted to the client. And so for like a shell script, client credentials will probably always work. But if for some reason you have an API that forcibly wants a resource owner, then yes, this is the flow type you would use on the shell.
One common one that comes up where you want a resource owner is if whatever call you're making changes the database and it logs who the user was and made the change. Then, like we had that situation where we just threw in client credentials, but then the user was like, it says that all the changes were the user that made the changes was system user, and so we had to try to switch it to say, okay, use the actual resource owner ones. But
I mean, so my API, I want it to be able to be accessible. I mean, why have an API if you can't use it?
right,
And so I want it to be able to be used at the owner's credential level. So that's fine.
great.
Yeah, and so 99% of the time, it works either way. There's very few APIs that we have that require
So
resource
which
owner.
grant type would you use if you just got a system, nobody at the keyboard, a system's talking to another system? Yes.
It's all OAuth 2.0.
Client credential. Well,
Client credential, yeah, let's not have Scott answering. Let's say you've got a JavaScript single page app. Which grant type would you want to use?
the last one we just talked about.
Why? Right, but why?
Well, your static files are all public.
Yeah,
So
exactly. And you're not,
something
and it doesn't actually have access to the secret password. So somebody could inspect your code and then find your secret. Right. When would you want to use, which of the three grant types has a person at the keyboard available? All of them have a system calling another system, right? But three of them, I'll give you a hint, have a user at the keyboard as well. Which ones are those?
everything below client credentials.
Very good. Resource owner credentials is a nice kind of one you can use for testing out stuff. If you want to use authorization code implicit, but you want an easier way to do it with no browser redirects, that's resource owner. Any questions about these?
Yeah.
It took me literally months to figure this out, so that's why I'm trying to figure
Why
out.
would you need a refresh and access token if the resource owner credentials can return?
Very
It's
good question. Resource owner credentials puts you have to manage the resource owner's credentials. So your system would know what their usernames and passwords are. That's why we don't generally prefer that one. We generally, in those cases, want to go with authorization code, because that'll redirect the user for them to enter their own username and password, and then go back to your system, and then
That's
you're
what
not,
that's
and your system doesn't even get the username and password. So that's a nice option.
Right, well,
But that's only for like back-end systems where it's not in the browser, that would be like the server side. With no authorization.
yeah, and you get a refresh token so that in those use cases you could trash the credentials. You don't have to store them long term, and that allows you to do that with a refresh token.
Any other questions? You will get this. The easiest one's client credentials. If you can use that, simple. Almost a one-to-one mapping with like get a nonce and then send your API call. Client credentials is just get a token, send your API call. Except you don't have to do it on every single web service and such, right? You just do it once, and then you can do it as many times as you want for an hour. If the token won't last that.
And you have to check to see if the request is expired. And then
I'd actually recommend not doing that, because we had some apps doing that, and they incorrectly checked when it was expired. So it's just simpler, we've noted, that to just check to see if it gets back, if your call says, oh, I got a 401 back. If the 401 response code comes back, it means likely your token was expired. So at that point, you just grab another token. It's just
Well,
simple
you have to
logic.
use your refresh token. request
Exactly.
to access.
Exactly. One of the easiest flows, because
So you try to eventually there isn't a refresh, but yeah, an off code or this. Sorry, off code.
Yeah.
So you probably want to write a wrapper for that.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's just one of the easiest use cases because it prevents you from keeping track of time.
Use it everywhere, just at one spot where you do that.
Scott, do you have a question? Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's just one of the easiest ways to handle that is you just go until you expect the error code that comes back when your token is expired is always looks the same. You can check that, see that's the error you got back, and then just go grab a new token and continue on.
So are we talking context of mostly CAS versus other APIs that we're talking about?
This
This
is,
is what would allow the user to enter in their username and password, but we're talking about any API. That's just the thing that would allow you to enter in the username.
yeah, because that's the token that you use to call all of these APIs, and that's the one that will last for an hour.
CAS itself doesn't have an API per se, you know.
Yeah.
Right, so like we're providing an API,
Mhm.
and we need to migrate to an OAuth 2.0 standard.
If you're providing the API, then we'll have a different discussion. There's a different set of information for providing. This is strictly on the consuming side.
Right, so we consume, sorry, I'm trying to be both. So we're consuming APIs.
Oh.
The APIs that we are consuming are most likely going to change in some way. Have access tokens.
They're all automatically switching to this access token method. But
Client credentials.
yeah, or any of these flow types. They work with all of the flows. So the way that this new
All the
API,
services will support all of
Right, these are the different types.
yeah, the way that this new API management infrastructure works is the backend web services themselves don't support OAuth.
Right.
There's a big piece of software sitting between you and any backend that authenticates with you, handles all of that, and then it passes known information to the backend. So the backends are relearning how to talk to this new software, but they don't actually speak OAuth. They speak a different standard that's utilized to communicate with them. And we can have that other discussion to discuss the producing side. Yeah, feel free to eat. So for all of these flow types, we do have sample code on the developer portal. We've got sample code in PHP, Python, Node, Java, JavaScript for the implicit grant type flows, and some .NET examples. So there's tons of examples out there, so you can kind of follow the code and see what's required to actually get these tokens and utilize them for an API call. All of the samples actually get you through a full API call. Okay, so we're gonna dig into the API store a little bit, go over how that works, so that we can see all of that. So the new API store is at api.byu.edu/store. Now,
Is there any particular reason to use a flow for it? You don't put the store on the end?
because that's an API call. You're trying to make an API call to the root.
Oh, I'm just guessing I'm trying anything.
There's no root API. I'm working to redirect you to the store if you do that. But currently it assumes you're trying to make an API call.
Well, I figured that.
It's because there isn't an API, it doesn't find a path there. You can click login. Anyone with a net ID can log into the store. You all have access automatically. So we're gonna go over some basics about how you interact with the store, what you need to do to get subscribed to an API. We'll also jump into Developer Portal a little bit and show you around what you can find in Developer Portal and how you can find things there. Let's actually start there real quick. All of this documentation, all of this stuff that we're talking about is all found on the Developer Portal, which is developer.byu.edu. There's a whole section about docs. If you just click this Consume an API page, you're gonna get a whole walkthrough. If you follow this walkthrough, you get an exorbitant amount of detail that you probably won't need, but it hopefully solves every use case. To walk you through from step one, I don't know anything about this new system, to actually being able to get data out of an API. We'll walk you through that whole path. There's also under here a little 5-minute quick start. If you just, wow, can't move my mouse apparently. This little 5-minute quick start will walk you through consuming a very specific API. It's very hand-holdy to get you through the whole process as well, which should help you get through and get more familiar with that. We'll kind of do a similar 5-minute walkthrough real quick. But all this documentation is here. You'll also see we have this lovely ticking countdown timer that makes me freak out every time I see it. And it tells you how long we've got left. And then if you click this migrate to the API store page, like Paul mentioned earlier, you can see videos for the trainings we have had in the past. If you want to watch through any of those, we go over the same kind of information every time and then talk specifically about a code backend to see what it took. And then there's steps to actually migrating your current consumption off from where you are today to this new infrastructure. And so there's a lot of resources here if you're looking for any of those. So in the API store, we talked earlier about what we call applications or client. Our new API infrastructure, or new API store, has the concept of applications. You create an application, it gives you a set of credentials. The scoping of an application should be, I mean, you kind of have a little bit of flexibility there. One of the main guidelines is if it's a separate piece of deployable code, it's a separate application. It needs its own set of credentials. In the past, we've had a lot of times where departments, I mean, even us inside of OIT, where we kind of give all of our applications the same credentials and they all share the credentials. We'd like, as you migrate over, to make sure that each of your applications self-identifies. It has its own credentials, it has its own name. That allows for a lot more fine-grained control in what's going on, and it also protects you from a lot of different attacks and a lot of different issues that can arise. So if you come into my applications, you'll see all of your applications. By default, you'll all have a default application that's generated for you as soon as you log in. But you can go ahead and create any application. Let's recreate this lovely test. So we can come in and create an application. Let's name it our test app. Throttling tiers. By default, you'll want to set unlimited for right now. If you have, for some reason, some specific use case that you want to be throttled, feel free to change how many requests a second you're allowed, but unlimited is a safe default.
As a rule, most of us would want more than unlimited.
Yeah, essentially. But
I guess it's
exactly. Exactly. You'll almost always want unlimited. There's not a great use case for you as a consumer to want to throttle yourself. It's just not a huge issue. You will see, there will be some developers. We allow the developers of the backend services to throttle you if they desire. So there may be some applications where you're not allowed unlimited access. But setting that here will not change any of that. It'll just set what you can do at most. Callback URL is extremely important in off-code and implicit grant types. The callback URL is essentially where the user gets sent back after the flow finishes. It's static. You set it for one application. Again, a good reason to have each application self-identify because there's only one possible callback URL. Yes?
When I go into the development workflow, I got a different server.
Uh-huh.
So do I come here and change this? How do I handle that scenario?
Yeah, you can come back in here at any time. I can come in and edit any of these that I've set and change that callback URL. Or have two different apps. Exactly. And that's why, yeah, I mean, so if I've got like application A.BYU.edu and application B.BYU.edu, they're going to need separate credentials because they're going to involve separate flows for that redirect to come back. And so I'm not going to set it because right now we're just going to deal with some client credential stuff as we go through and it's not needed. But again, any user flows will require you to have that there. So we've created that. And then we can jump into my subscriptions. It's where we're going to actually generate our keys. So if we jump in here, you'll see this little top drop-down bar. Right now I'm looking at my default application. I want to switch to my test application, and I can go ahead and click generate keys for production, generate keys for sandbox. Now, these keys, as it says, there's a consumer key, and that is a public identifier. You're okay to put that in code in places where it's seen. It's meant to be a public identifier, and it's utilized even in things like implicit grant type because it's not considered a secret. Now, the consumer secret is, per its name, secret. Please don't leak it. With your consumer secret, people have access to access any of the APIs you do.
So if this is a public key, why does it say public or ID or something rather than key?
It's the term that was used, so it is. It's part of the WSO2 spec, is the key and the secret. Sorry, I didn't make that clear.
I just think it's weird when you say key and you don't say it's public key.
Yeah, it's an interesting term. You'll also hear it called client ID. We often internally refer to it as client ID because it helps mitigate some of that. So if you ever hear me say client ID, I mean the key. And so that is a public identifier. It's just like your username essentially. So don't broadcast it everywhere on purpose, but you're free to do that. Now, one of the caveats, if you do leak your secret and that is exposed, the only way for you to regenerate your key and secret is to delete the entire application. This regenerate button regenerates your current valid access token. So you see that blue field changes, but the key and the secret are static. They can never change. That's how we identify you. That's how we know who you are. That's how we authorize you to all of the systems. They're not dynamic. So if you expose your credentials, delete the application, create a new application, swap out the credentials, and you're good to go. That is the way that we're leaving it. We don't want you to expose your credentials, so please don't. But we purposefully don't allow for changes to that because we want it static for logging and things like that. So
If you don't want to expose your credentials, I highly recommend you don't stick them in the same directory as your code. Because I
Bingo.
have at least 5 applications where someone's come along and pushed something that they thought was on a git ignore or whatever, and it still managed to get pushed on the git.
yeah, don't mention git ignore inside of OIT. We're really sore about that right now. So we've had a couple of issues.
Don't rely on it.
Yeah, don't rely on
Don't
it.
push your keys with your code.
Exactly. And so, yeah, it's not, we just don't want you to leak them. So please don't. And I know it will cause you pain when you do, and I'm okay with that because I would rather you not leak them. And if you do, you feel the pain. So now that access token is what you would actually use to make the call. So if you're testing, for example, you're running like Postman, whatever, you're just running a quick little API test, you're free to reach in here, click regenerate, copy that out, and that is a valid token right now. You can make an API call right this second. This is also where you would set your validity time. If you have some reason, some use case, where you want different length of expiry time on your tokens, you can change it in here. It's more advised, and in fact, we really, really push that you leave it at the default. If you have some use case to make it longer, that's okay, but it's best to leave it short. One of the parts about OAuth, because of the way the tokens are, the reason they expire is because it limits our scope of vulnerability. So if you get a token that's leaked out there in the wild, someone can use it for the remainder of the hour and then they're done. So that exposure really is limited to the length of that token. If you make a token last for 10 days, they're gonna have that token for 10 days. And so we really wanna keep that exposure as limited as possible without making life miserable.
So you have to come back in here and get a new token, because you're using the access token to do the request. Right?
Yeah, this is just for you for like testing purposes, but this is all can be done programmatically,
Yeah,
right?
your library should include that.
Your library handles this for you. This regenerate right here is doing client credentials, and that can be done programmatically in your own script. Does that make sense?
Not exactly.
Okay, we'll go over it.
Okay.
But yeah, no, there's nothing, you will never have to come here. Every way to get a token can be written into code. This is just here to make it easy for you. If you wanted a token without writing code, like if you just want to do a postman call to an API, you can reach in here and grab a token.
So what you're saying is we can just hit the API.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's how we want you to do it. Please don't be copying in and out every hour. Okay, so now we're going to get into actually how we'd subscribe to an API, how we're going to get that. If you have APIs that you've used in the past, because of the URLs changing, we've changed the names in some cases. Do not shoot me because some of the names are horrible. It wasn't my fault. We've got on this, let me go back because I wasn't talking while you were doing that. So on this migrate page that we linked to from right here.
I prefer mine starting with communications than IS access or whatever.
Again, I'm just the messenger. It's a long story, but so on this page, this very first step, we've got this little lookup tool, which allows you to plug in a service name or service URL that you've currently been using in the past and see where it's hosted now. So for example, if we used like person travel info, then these are the API endpoints where it used to be, and this is where we can get to it now. It always starts with api.byu.edu. And clicking this will actually take us to the page in the store where we can interact with that API, where we can subscribe to it. We're not going to subscribe to this one for testing. We're going to subscribe to an Echo service. But that is how you can easily find. We want to make it as easy as possible for you to say, this is the API I'm using today. Where do I need to go now? Because that's not, a guessable thing today. So if we want to come in here, I'm going to subscribe to, we have some Echo test services. Obviously more than one. Now, if we get in here to this screen, this is the Echo web service. I'm able to see an overview, gives me the URL to actually invoke the API. I can view it in Info Hub, which we'll discuss in a minute what that is and when that comes into play. I can also view the documentation in Developer Portal where I'm seeing the actual documentation, which we'll dig into as well over here. Has a short description. If you want to share it on Facebook, go right ahead. Yeah, that's up to you. Because we focused on putting documentation in the Developer Portal, this documentation tab will essentially always be empty. It'll be hidden within the next couple of days. Now, this API console actually allows you to interact with the API via client credentials right here in the UI. It helps you test. You can kind of play around with the API a little bit without actually having to write code. Makes it really easy. It'll help you fill out your requests, and it'll even spit you out curl parameters and stuff like that if you want to copy that and put that into code. But to be able to do any of that, we have to start with a subscription. If we try to call any API without a subscription, you'll get back an error saying you're not authorized, which means that you just haven't asked for authorization for it. You can also get throttling information if you really care. So we want to come over here and I'll pick my application. So I want to use my test application. And I want to subscribe to the unlimited tier. Double check what tier you're subscribing to. I just had someone in production yesterday say, oh, we subscribe to gold and not unlimited. So subscribe to the right tier. It helps later. So I'll actually talk about that real quick. The tiers, you'll actually get a little description right here when you select tier. So bronze is 1 request a minute, silver is 5, gold is 20. And then unlimited is unlimited. There is no throttling involved in unlimited. So again, if you as a consumer would really like to limit yourself, feel free. Most cases when you'll actually have to deal with that ever is that a publisher chooses which tiers they're allowing to be available. So if the unlimited tier hadn't been allowed, you just wouldn't even see it as an option. And that's just something to take into account. I don't yet know of a current API that we're throttling, but it's a possibility that you would run across that in the future. It'll also be used for things like there's intention inside of OIT to allow CS classes and stuff like that to utilize our APIs to interact in their classes. In those cases, we'd probably throttle the students so that when a student writes rogue code and it takes down a service, we can shut them off. And that is actually one of the benefits we currently have with this infrastructure. Today, and even in the last year, I think already we're in the 4th month almost of the year. We've been through 3 whole months. We've already had like 2 or 3 times where we've had someone writes code that accidentally gets stuck in a loop, and we take down a total service for everyone on campus because someone's code went rogue. In today's world, or in the world we've been in for a long time, we had no way to stop that. We couldn't shut you off. In this new world, the developers of the backend services are able to shut you off. They'll be able to see whose code it is that went rogue, who's just totally hammering the system, and with a click of a button, they can shut you off, which helps us not take down a service for all of campus. And it really helps in that sense so that you're not having to worry about, oh, person went down because we broke it. Sorry.
WSO2 throttling that back itself before you get pulled from the
Because we're choosing to let you be unlimited, we haven't set any parameters. We can. We just haven't today. And WSO2 will kick off alerts to us to say something's not right. But today we don't have it auto throttle because we want to play with it a little bit before we choose to do that. So, and one of the nice things is that the current infrastructure can handle a lot more load than our old infrastructure could. So it also takes a bit more to bring us down today. So now that we've subscribed to this application, if we actually come into the API console, you'll see that I'm given a token here. One of the things to keep in mind is that the UI will not auto refresh your token. So in an hour, it's still going to show me that token, but it'll be invalid. If you ever need to refresh your token, you just always jump into the My Subscriptions page and refresh. So just kind of keep that in mind. You know, it's kind of a little frustrating. I know it's a little hokey. Hopefully that'll be fixed in the future, but where that's only strictly for testing cases. You know, in production, this isn't even involved.
What was the 11 domains?
If you want to scope what domains you allow your tokens to be called from for like off-code and implicit grant type, you can. We're not in a huge use for that today. No, we don't have a huge use today. Now, I can go ahead and call any of these APIs. I can pick which keys I'm using. I can pick in here and say, oh, well, let's call the status endpoint. It'll tell me any parameters that are involved. I can fill them out. If they're optional, you know, I don't have to. And I can click try it out. And I will get the response code back. So you'll see a whole curl command that you could just copy and paste right into your terminal. You'll see what URL was actually called. And if there had been query parameters, stuff like that, you'd see it tacked onto the end. You'll get a response body, what the response code was, and all of the headers that are involved. And so this tool is super useful to help you kind of play with the API, dig into it, kind of help you as you're trying to write your code as well. And even here we can say like test, and we're going to get back the whole body. This service is used for testing and brings back everything that is seen by the back end. But you'll be able to utilize all of that. In cases where you have like request bodies and stuff like that, when the API is actually documented correctly, we still have a couple APIs we're on the developer's backs about. I promise we're trying to work on it. But you'll see an example, you'll see example bodies for the request. You'll be able to click on it and it'll just auto-populate, and you can change a couple of parameters. It makes it really, really nice to just interact with the API right from a UI if you're not quite certain how you want to use the API yet. Are there questions about this part yet? Okay. And the store is completely and totally used as a tool for you to help you develop, help you find the APIs you're looking for. And like we said, you know, once you're in production, you don't have to touch the store. You know, if your code's running and everything's running smoothly, your tokens are fine, you're just good to go. The store isn't something you'll have to get to on a regular basis at all. So that's kind of a little overview of the store. You are also able to see, I've mentioned a couple of times, the documentation in the developer portal. You can search by, so for example, if I wanted a person service, I can see a whole bunch of person service like ID photo, identity creation, guest access. You're also able to even search by like what returns net ID. And I don't know why the internet's being slow today. you're able to see that there's 55 APIs that bring back a net ID in some form. You can actually dig into those, figure out what you're looking for, and you'll see the API documentation. You'll see all the paths, all the methods. You'll be able to actually see what the parameters are, what their descriptions are. All of that information will be available to you in this documentation. And this documentation is automatically updated, auto-generated as things change. We also link you out here to a couple of places. We've got a lot of tools involved in this new infrastructure. We're trying to integrate them as best as possible for you. You can click right here to view that again in the API store. It'll pop you right to that page if you're looking to subscribe to it or play with it through the API console. It's available to you. We'll also link you out to InfoHub. Again, we haven't touched that yet, but we'll talk about InfoHub. And we're hooked into, if any of you are familiar with BYU's Ask community. Ask is essentially a Stack Overflow clone that is utilized inside of the BYU web community. We're using it for questions about the APIs and stuff like that. And any general API consumption questions you have, you can go there. If you click this little link here, it will auto-populate the right tags for you to ask the question. And when questions are asked about an API, they'll show up in this right-hand column. So, frequently asked questions, we are probably going to end up owning it in OIT.
It's doing some.
Today, we don't own it. Yeah, I don't know. But today, we don't own it. That's a whole nother discussion.
Where's the lookup tool? Sorry. I can't find
Yeah,
it.
no, you're fine. For the migration stuff, the difference. So if you click this little migrate,
Oh,
and then this first step says lookup tool. We may end up making that a top level thing. You can also just search lookup tool. No, or in the search on the page. You can try it on Google. I bet you're gonna get 100 lookup tools, but and that'll lead you to here. Did you find it?
and then lookup tool.
Yep.
So the WS API, is that a common one?
Yeah, ws.byu.edu is currently very common. It's going away. All of anything that was consumable through WS is being moved to api.byu.edu. If that makes sense.
Okay. So
We
mine was ws.bu.edu/authentication.
Yep. And so that is what was used for the old I'm sorry, I'm not going to use internal terms. For the old API nonce authentication stuff that you did, you called that. Because nonce authentication is going away, that URL's gone. Yeah, you can move to CAS because of those. That's what we talked about with the auth code, the implicit grant type. All of those are what are replacing that /authentication call.
Oh, so we can just move the CAS then. We still have to subscribe to something.
Yeah, you still have to subscribe to APIs. So if you're calling now, so this is all only for API consumption, right? So only your calls to an API. For your own personal website, you're free to continue to authenticate via CAS, do whatever you want. But that /authentication URL that you used to call was only for API calls. That was how you dealt with an API call. Now you'll either have to do client credentials, which is another API call just to a different API endpoint in a different way, or do auth code or implicit and redirect the user through CAS. Does that make sense? And as we move forward through this migration, we don't want to leave you out in the dark as well. If you need help, please get in touch with us. We've got a lot of us that are slated to just help through this migration. That is my whole day's work between now and like the end of forever, it seems like. But I'm here to help. There's a lot of us here to help. We've done this migration a lot of times already in OIT. And so don't feel like you're at it alone or that you need to figure it all on your own. We're happy to help. Just kind of to put that plug in, we want to make sure that you're aware that we've got resources available to help you walk through all of this process. So that's kind of just a brief overview. Developer portal, there's tons of stuff in developer portal. You can easily get lost, but there's a ton of just really, really useful information there for whatever you're looking for. Try developer.byu.edu first. And if you don't find it there, shoot us a question and ask. We're watching that all the time. We make sure that you get the right people answering your question. The reason we would like you to direct your questions there instead of like via an email or Slack or anything like that is because we like having the historical aspect of it. I get asked the same question probably 200 times a day. And so when we can get it and ask and we can get it answered and ask and people look there first, it saves me some time in the day, and saves you because you don't have to wait for me. So that's why we would love for you to just kind of shoot and to ask first. So now, one of the other considerations with this migration is your events. Does anyone in the room currently consume events out of the Event Hub? Or do you even know? Have you ever even heard of the Event Hub? I think there's probably some OIT people who have. If you happen to be consuming events through the Event Hub today, a lot of events that we trigger return a secure URL or a callback URL. Those URLs will change to utilize WSO2 URLs. They will utilize the new authentication mechanism instead of the API nonce token. You will be using OAuth 2. So just kind of keep that in mind as well for any API events that you're consuming. We've got a couple of dashboards that you can watch, especially if you're migrating big applications. We've got a couple places where you can go to see how much of your traffic is going from one place to another, things like that. We'll go over that in a little while. Now, really to kind of overview and pull everything that we've talked about so far back into a concise little ball. The steps that you need to take to migrate are picking which OAuth flow is right for you, because it's all OAuth, but there's 4 different ways to go about it. You can pick which one of those 4 ways is best for you today. So you'll change that. Once you've picked that, you'll change authentication from the API nonce stuff to this OAuth flow that you've picked, and change the URL that you're calling. That is for 99% of the APIs you call today, that will be all you have to do. Like I said kind of early on, there's hardly any of the APIs that have changed the way they're working. They take the same requests that they always have. They respond in the same manner. Your logic isn't going to have to change, with the exception of things like if you're calling HR web services that change from SOAP to REST. But outside of that, none of these APIs have changed. You're just going to have to change authentication mechanism, and then you're really good to go. Your applications will continue to work as they always have. We wanted to make this migration as easy as possible. Didn't want to change all 130 APIs that you might be using to some new method. We just wanted to make it so you could change as little as possible to get going. So today, we've got Glenn, who has done work. This is Glenn. Glenn has migrated. Weird waiver, is that what we're doing today?
Traffic.
Traffic?
Parking admin.
Woo, parking admin. Okay. This is like the 6th training we've done in 2 weeks, so it's hard to keep track. Where he's going to go over the code that actually changed. What it took for him to migrate his PHP front end from consuming APIs through the old method to consuming them in this new way. Feel free to bombard him with questions and ask him, what kind of things he had to change. When all of this is over as well, after you guys have gone back, we'll post this video online, so if you ever want to rewatch it. And we'll also post a link to a GitHub pull request that'll include all of the changes that happened, so you can see it all kind of in one clump of what it took to change from consuming through the old infrastructure through consuming the new infrastructure. Okay? Glenn, do you want to?
Okay, this is the nonce stuff, and this is for the Cake PHP framework, and so there's a few Cake PHP stylistic things, but generally it's mostly fairly plain PHP. So saying, okay, this is an API authentication piece. An authentication piece is saying, hey, I need an authorization header. So get token, go get bearer token. And the bearer token. Wait, no, this is. Sorry, dang it.
You're looking at
That's
the new stuff.
The old one. Well, I'll just go a couple of releases back. Yeah, should be that one. There we are.
Yeah.
Okay. There's everything. So we just need to. This is the old version. We say, hey, we need nonce. And so we said, okay, call the nonce stuff and blah, 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 and generate and spit it back out. And it did this for every single call, for every single web REST call that's going out. So in the back.
So before you start, which
Yeah.
method are you after with the OAuth2 route?
This is, right now I'm going to show you client credentials, but this system does have both of them in, but I do have one that has both, that has, not both, has client credentials and the off code. Sorry. Okay, so this is the client credentials one. Because unlike the nonce thing, we can keep the token for a while. And I have a little bit of extra stuff in here saying, okay, so I need a token, I need to put this bearer token in here. So get the bearer token is see if the session is there. If it's empty, then go generate it. And then I do have in my code here a thing that does keep track of the time. And I say, if it's 5 minutes away from expiring, then go regenerate it again. Like Braden said, you can have it so you don't even bother ever doing that. You just say, hey, just keep going until I get until I get a 401 response. But this is the way to do it if you're keeping track of the time, which we'll get to in a second. So generate bearer token. So it doesn't look too much different than the get nonce. It's similar kind of thing. Just say, hey, here's a magical URL to go to. Here's the basic auth. Curl has the set the key and secret and go get it and see what happens and see if the data that comes back, if you've got an access token in the data and you, it's all good. And then the actual field that comes back is expires in. It just tells you how many seconds until it expires. And so I transformed that. I said, okay, based on my local server time, my expire time is going to be whatever my server says the correct time is plus that many seconds. And then I put that in the session. So that goes, and then the 5 minute, when I say it's time to 5 minutes left, regenerate, I actively said, okay, go back out to clarification. If you just say 5 minutes left, go generate it again. If you just generate it again with the same information, it's just going to come back with the same token and say you've got,
Oh, right.
It knows you're the same person, so it gives you the same token back.
Right.
And so that doesn't do anything. So I manually said, okay, go out to the revoke URL and say revoke this token in particular, and then generate the token again. So that's pretty close to the nonce thing, just with the extra wrapper stuff of saying, hey, remember what the token was. I don't have to go out and get it every time. So the other one I have here.
So do you have to, if you do detect before the 300,
yeah,
then you have to revoke, and then you have logic to call what.
If your token expires, so if you start getting a 401 back, when you call for a new token, you will get a new one. The only time you'll get the same token back is if you still have a valid token today.
right.
Yeah. So if you
that's right, my
So
layout
you're
here.
detecting before you make the request.
I'm detecting before I make the request in this particular case.
Tracking the time.
And the request is just consuming the API.
Right. Yes, this is just the piece. This little file here was just an authentication piece.
This is just using client credentials.
Correct.
Which means just you have a.
Yeah.
consumer
Here's
key
the
and-
grant type client credentials. Here is
But
the
you were getting the access token somewhere else before. Were you saving that somewhere?
no. Sorry. Yes, I'm saying the
We're
first.
saving the access token.
Yeah, the very first time the code hits this, it's going to say, hey, token info, read the session. If it's empty, if there's nothing in the session, then go generate it. And then after it's either when it was in the session or it just generated, either way, it's going to fall through to this where it says, okay, if the expired time is less than 5 minutes from now, then regenerate it. So the more complicated one change font here. No, yeah, that is good. So a more complicated version where I have client credentials and the authorization code both in this thing. Okay, so I say get token. First, to make sure that the configuration in the system is okay. They've got a key and a secret, and you're telling me which grant token it is. Okay, again, I say, hey, check the session. And I actually have a couple of different session keys because in this actual system, we are making two kinds of calls. This particular one is saying, hey, go get the client credential version or go get the authorization code one. So I'm saying, okay, in the session, I say, okay, for this particular client ID in this grant type, check if it's there in the session. If it's not, then check the expiration time and all that. So the differences are, number one, for this particular system, it's mostly single page application, and so we can't. I had to have a separate thing where for the authorization code happens when the page first loads, but then it does. But then when the page stays up for a long duration, and the user is doing background calls and stuff, so I had to separate out this get token from an initialization that happens when the page first loads, and to get the initial token for the client credentials for the authorization code, because the authorization code is the one that's like CAS, wherein their browser has to go and they have to type in to a redirected page. So, yeah.
So you're saying that you check your token every time a page loads, or when do you check the secret tokens?
I check the which part.
So you're talking about the check with it if it's within the 5-minute period. Is that okay? So I was wondering if you can find something else.
Yeah. So there's the one check that says are we 5 minutes out from the token expiry? That happens on every single API call because that's the part that says, hey, I've already got a token. I don't need to go back and do any server stuff. It was in the session. I've got it here. But then it says, oh, whoops, but I've only got 5 minutes left. That's my heuristic window to say, you know, we're close enough. Let's go grab another one. I'm going to skip that for a second. So generate token. So this difference here. So yeah, I'm trying to separate out of my brain what is unique to this particular app that you don't need to worry about, and what is actually general here. Okay, so I'll go through this. So for the 5 minutes, one thing I added here is if I have a refresh token, then do the refresh. Otherwise, do the regenerate, which is the one I had before. Regenerate looks exactly the same, where it says go revoke the existing one and then generate again. Refresh token, if I've got it, it says, okay, I've got the token right now. It's about to expire, but I've got a refresh token, and so that's a more direct. Just saying, hey, I've got a refresh token. Give me a new token using the grant type refresh token. So, but the end result is the same as, hey, I've got a refresh token. It's all good. Great, let's go. Let's party. So in actual practice here, let me bring up network so you can watch as it goes. So we've got host. Just running on my local thing here. So it goes to the page invisibly to the user. I'm already CAS logged in, so it's going to skip that completely. So the user I didn't have to see anything in this case. But if we look closely here, again, another stupid thing with this particular app that you guys don't have to worry about probably is I had to have CAS authentication separate from the OAuth thing, which also goes through CAS, but I couldn't share the information. If you use the authorization code and all you need to know your app, all you need to know about the user is like their net ID and their name and even their person ID, then you can use the information that comes back from the OAuth authentication code. In my particular case, I needed some extra information that automatically gets included. I needed the grow groups that come back with the CAS call. if your app does the CAS authentication that wasn't easily available with the OAuth call. So slide cookies. So that's
Remember that very, just go by that OAuth call, using identity comes back exactly like you did.
yes.
You get an ID token back alongside the access token and the refresh token, and it's just an encoded JWT of their information.
So it's okay. So it's clear.
But we don't include grow groups today, and there's no API to just get a single user's whole list of grow groups. So
Okay. So
yeah,
now I can
I
see
know.
this is the
it's being worked on.
Yeah, so this is the usual, I'm going to my app, I've got the standard CAS authentication, and then after the CAS authentication, it comes back and looking here, there we go. Now it's going through the WSO2 and it's being a little slow, but there it goes. So even after the CAS came back, then it went to the API.wad, which then bounced through CAS again and got the information. Because of what I was just rambling about. So, yes, I'm rambling somewhat. So, questions from my rambling?
So the difference between the two is you're using a refresh token.
Yes,
And can you go back to the refresh token call?
yes,
It's just going back to API token, they include the refresh token.
right,
Now returns back an access token if you use again.
correct. So the regenerate, if you don't have a refresh token, and you want to force a new token, you have to say, okay, revoke this one, and then go generate it again. The refresh token is more, it's a single call, it's more direct to say, okay, go back, give me a new token, and instead of grant type authorization code or client credentials, it's grant type refresh token. I say, give me a new token. I have a refresh token, so give me a token, and the like you said in the when Brady was giving the overview, the client for authorization code and refresh token and that stuff, you have to explicitly say where the browser will redirect back to. So when you set up your app when you set up your application record in the store, you have to have the callback URL that has to match, so that somebody else can't even if they get your secret and they try to put it on their website, if they try to pass that through to WSO2, it's gonna say, okay, you said the redirect is back to evil site.uiw, and that doesn't match the application. So
They work.
right.
So this is behind the scenes though, right?
Right.
Post request or something, so what's
Well, no,
going on
okay.
with redirect?
Okay, it had when you do the, I should have an example. I should have had an example set up so we can see this. The
redirect URL only comes into play with auth code
right,
and implicit when you are redirecting user. With client credentials, it doesn't matter.
yeah, client credentials is all in the background. User authorization, where if the authorization code, that's
client credentials example.
I'm sorry, I'm doing both at the same time. You only get the refresh token for a user for authorization code.
Yeah, the refresh token is part of the authorization code.
Right. So the redirect that happens, what's redirecting?
Okay, so
If it's
You
happening
only
on the back-
redirect in the first call.
yeah, the very first call. So I came back. So this call, and I don't know if you can even see it, but so I came back from localhost with the usual cast call. And said, okay, here's my page. Then my code said, okay, cast is fine and good. I still need an auth token. So from my browser, there's the go ahead and dang it.
So in order to refresh, you have to pass in a redirect?
No, you don't have.
No, sorry.
Not on the refresh call.
Oh, okay, that's
So-
why I'm getting.
Oh yeah, and that's for the
No, the refresh call only involves your client's credentials and the refresh token.
Sorry,
Go back
yes,
to
sorry.
your code.
Yes, sorry. But and I didn't think that, and I tried it. I tried grant type
Because there's a
type
redirect URL like this.
Yes.
Refresh.
that. So
It's superfluous.
it's but it's necessary. I tried the call without it, and it didn't work. The grant type refresh token with refresh
Just
token,
wants it there, even though it's not.
correct. It wants it there and it has to be accurate. Sorry, yes.
And then
Oh,
it's
just
just
for
security,
validation.
obviously.
So even with refresh token, it wants that redirect URI. And maybe that's not necessary, we can fix that, but when I tried that with this code, just
Interesting.
out that line in there, it didn't work.
I didn't think it had to, but we'll discuss that.
And if you need a refresher on all these like redirects and all of that, if you want to get into that, there's probably documentation all over the world.
Right.
It's
Speaking of which, did you implement all of this, or are you relying on WSO2 library?
This part was, there wasn't a WSO2 library that I found in my, I did this yesterday, this chunk right here. The initial,
We don't provide WSO2 libraries for clients because it's an OAuth library. You use any generic OAuth library.
Sorry, I did not use a generic OAuth library just because the ones that I did a quick scan, they were, a lot of them are geared towards server side stuff, and they were either more complex or just didn't fit what I needed. So this is
Client consumption is simple enough that you don't have to use a library if you don't want to. I mean, you can do it in fairly few number of lines of code.
So yeah, this is my entire OAuth library for this particular application that has the client credentials and the authorization code, and it's merged into this particular framework that I'm using and using its syntax and whatever, and it's still what 200 lines of code for client consumption. So
And this is a public GitHub repo, right?
yes,
So if you wanted to reference this, use this, you have to.
So yeah, I think I'm done with my rambling at the moment.
So is there anything you would factor out of this code, or is it everything you want?
At the moment, it's pretty clean for how my brain is today, but I actually did refactor it today an hour or two ago when I found out it's going to be doing this. I was like, oh man, it's ugly. I'm going to clean it up. So it's refactored a little bit already. So right at the moment, it matches my brain and how we built this particular app, but there's probably some things I would do differently. So.
And your 5-minute thing doesn't buy you anything like a 401 check.
No, no, it doesn't. The reason I did that in this particular framework was they already had the hooks in there to say, if you want to add authorization to your web calls, here's where you add authorization. The code hooks to respond to particular web responses was a little more complicated, and so that. And also, I had already built in the hooks for the authorization for the not stuff earlier, and so this is a drop-in replacement for the not stuff.
It's a smaller change.
Yeah, smaller change. It is. The 401 would be smarter, but I did. It's how it works.
I was to say, we're also trying to roll out soon, so.
Yeah.
Questions? Are your brains fried? They're not impressed. That's all I'm saying.
And again, I mean, we've got the whole developer portal full of resources. Please use it. I mean, feel free to dig through it. If you find an issue, let us know. We've got all the documentation out there because we know it's not going to stick the first time. It's a lot of information to digest. There's a lot of pieces that move around. But developer portal's here. We're here to help you. If you have any concerns, please reach out and let us know.
So if we had SOAP requests for, it's basically just switching over to the rest. And then
In most cases, what I would
have
do,
a SOAP request.
yeah, so email me.
This system right here is actually doing SOAP requests with this.
There are a couple of SOAP services still in WSO2. There's just less. So if I communicate out that there's none, I'm sorry. There's just way less than there used to be.
Okay.
But look it up in the lookup tool. See if it's there. See if it's still SOAP. If not, shoot me an email and let me know that you're using it, and we'll make sure that we've got you on the right path.
Yeah, so at least in the calls that we're making for, I don't know which system you're calling, and if it's currently using the nonce stuff, then the place where this used to say authorization and then the go get nonce code that I had, and now I just switched to the authorization bearer WSO2 token. So that's just, if the SOAP calls you're making, we're going through WSO2, you're using the nonce stuff, then wherever it moved to now, it should be a drop-in use token in the authorization header instead of the bearer token in the header instead of nonce thing.
So,
Oh, well, that would be a simple change.
yeah, assuming you've got some token, it's just whatever the WSO2.
Oh, but
Yeah.
Well, SOAP, OAuth 2, I mean, they're kind of different things.
Yeah.
So it'll still be SOAP, it's just that the authentication mechanism is OAuth 2
I see.
instead of
Yeah,
that
if you're calling one that's you can use, yeah, it depends on if you
Call
call
it
it.
to do an integration like this. So
The SOAP calls, the system we were calling wasn't using SOAP authentication. It was just raw SOAP calls, and the authentication was in the header with the Knox stuff. So yeah, if the system is using SOAP authentication, that's different. All right.
Any other questions?
You can go over the info hub stuff, or
Oh, thank you. So InfoHub essentially, are any of you familiar with data sharing agreements? You probably won't need InfoHub. So what InfoHub is in BYU we have something called a data sharing agreement. So if you need essentially administrator rights to an API, if you need access to see all students' credentials or all students' GPAs or stuff like that, we've in the past done what's called the data sharing agreement, and we authorize you for that. That is all automated now through InfoHub, and I'm happy to show you the interface. But that is what, if you don't need elevated rights to an API, you won't ever have to touch InfoHub.
well, I do. If nobody else needs it, then I can just come talk.
Well, we can show it real quick, and then we can also still have the discussion.
So I need employee status, that seems to be elevated.
And it's very possible. Now, the other thing to keep in mind too, for those of you who, so both you, Scott, and remind me of your name? Tanner. If you currently today have elevated access, we'll migrate that for you. You won't have to re-go through a new agreement. Part of this migrate page, this second step here, nope. Fifth step, essentially will connect what is your current authentication and authorization pieces to your new credentials. Essentially the way it used to work is that the API key was associated to what we refer to as a non-person person or an organization ID. We're just going to reassociate that non-person person organizational ID to your new credentials. And then all of your authorizations will continue to work the same way they always have. Does that make sense a little? I know it's a little bit.
Lost me on the non-person ID. So,
You don't need to worry.
well, no, because the way that I've been working with Belinda on this,
Yep.
and she created a new person ID for every single
Yes.
application.
Yep.
Is that the way-
And so just make sure to tell Belinda, and I can communicate with Belinda as well, that you need the same authorizations that were on that original person to go to all of those new
Right.
people.
You say, here's the person ID, or you can just say, here's the keys that were generated for this person ID.
And
here's
he's
the
done that.
Here's the new application keys.
Yep.
Please
I
link
sent
these.
her all the keys.
Yep.
that she needed.
And perfect, you're already down that road then. And so just make sure that Belinda copies over the authorizations and you'll be good to go. So essentially what will happen is because you originally had one person, right? Now we split that out into like 5. So we'll just copy what that one person had to make sure each of the 5 has the same permissions. And then they'll all work like they always have. So I double check with Linda, make sure that that's what she is doing. And if you have any issues, let me know. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you all for coming. If you need any help, please reach out.